งั้นในช่วงถัดไปนะคะระหว่างที่คณะกรรมการไปตัดสินใจนะคะก็ขอชื่นชมนะคะทุกทีมที่เตรียมการนำเสนอมาอย่างดีเลยนะคะทางออนก็น่าหนักใจแทนทีมคณะกรรมการที่จะต้องไปตัดสินเลือกทีมที่เป็นผู้ชนะ3ทีมนะคะ So the judging session for 10 startup pitches has now concluded. The judges have talked about commercialization potential for deep tech research. And this is a great segue into our next topic and featured speaker. ในระหว่างที่คณะกรรมการประเมินการนำเสนอการให้คะแนนนะคะเดี๋ยวเราจะขอเรียนเชิญฟังท่านวิทยากรพิเศษจากบริษัท Boston Scientific ค่ะออนขออนุญาตเรียนเชิญทางคุณ Benjamin Cheong แล้วก็ทางคุณ Jonathan Goldstein นะคะจะเข้ามามีบทบาทในการpresent นะคะของวันนี้เกี่ยวกับทางด้านหัวข้อ What's your exit strategy and how medical device corporates can support startups and academia เนื่องจากเดี๋ยวออนจะขอส่วนตรงนี้เดี๋ยวออนจะขออนุญาตแนะนำเป็นภาษาอังกฤษนะคะ For this next section, I would like to invite our special guests for today that will be our featured speakers. We have Mr.Benjamin Cheong, who is the country director for Thailand and Philippines, and also Mr. Jonathan Goldstein, who is the director for global technology partnerships. Boston Scientific was founded in 1979 and is a manufacturer of leading medical devices in areas such as interventional radiology, interventional cardiology, peripheral interventions, neuromodulation, vascular surgery, electrophysiology, and cardiac surgery. Boston Scientific is a global medical technology leader with approximately $11 billion in annual revenues and is represented in more than 120 countries. The company's team has more than 38,000 global employees, and every day they reach over 30 million patients per year. Actually, Mr. Michael Mahoney, the CEO of Boston Scientific, the Chulalongkorn University had the honor of hosting him in 2018, and I believe that it was the first time that he visited Thailand as well. So it's great that we get to continue this conversation on how we can support the medical innovation ecosystem in Thailand and in Asia. Boston Scientific is also extremely active in terms of acquisitions and supporting startups. They've made 39 acquisitions so far and 44 investments, totaling over $5.2 billion US. Our teams today have an amazing opportunity to not only listen to this featured talk, but also to ask any questions that they might have with such a leading global medical company. I would like to introduce Mr. Benjamin Cheong. So Ben is the country director for Thailand and Philippines, and he has held this position since 2019. I believe we met actually during that time, right before the COVID pandemic hit. And right now, he is working with the team to grow businesses as well as improve effectiveness and efficiency to support functions. Before moving to Thailand, he was the country director for Taiwan and Hong Kong since March, and prior to that, the urology marketing director for Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. He is currently based in Singapore and has worked as the general manager for Medtronic China. And he holds a business degree from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore and an MBA from the Kelley School of Business, Indiana University in the USA. Our next featured speaker is Mr. Jonathan Goldstein, and he's joined Boston Scientific since 2012. He interfaces with the Israeli technology and projects and generates collaborations across the spectrum of Boston Scientific's R&D division, venture, and business development functions. Jonathan spearheaded the creation of the global scouting team that actually visited Chulalongkorn University a couple of years ago to come and scout for deep technologies. The scouting team is responsible for identifying next-gen products that will fit in well with the Boston Scientific pipeline. So far, they've achieved 12 technology solutions from this initiative. Jonathan is originally from the UK and is dialing right now to join our talk from Israel. He has extensive experience in developing medical startups, and he holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and Biochemistry from the Imperial College London and an MBA from the University of London. So I'm going to have to excuse myself because I'm going to have to join the panel of judges so that I can come back and prepare to announce the winners. So in my place, I would like to introduce the moderator for today's session, Associate Professor Dr. Boonrat Lohwongwatana. Dr. Boonrat is an Associate Professor of Metallurgical Engineering at Chulalongkorn University. He's the Director of the Biomedical Engineering Research Center and also a key advisor for medical innovations for UTC. He has also pioneered 3D printing technologies and has successfully spun out his startup, Meticuli. Currently, they already have Thai FDA approval and are in over 200 cases of patients. Right now, they are pursuing regulatory approval in other countries, such as the US FDA. I would like to welcome Dr. Boonrat to take over this session and moderate the special talk on what's your exit strategy, how medical device corporates can support startups and academia. Welcome, Dr. Boonrat, Ben, and Jonathan.
I guess I'll take the podium from here, but let's make it very friendly and easy for everyone following a very long day. Great pitches, and I think the judges are having a difficult time. So we have the honor of having both Ben and Jonathan with us to talk a little bit about the end of the tunnel, which is the exit strategies. So without further ado, I guess, Ben, would you like to go first and discuss a little bit about Boston Scientific? And then Jonathan would be the star of today's talk, and he will just discuss about this exit. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Dr. Boonrat. And I'll just spend a few quick minutes before I hand over to Jonathan. First of all, a really good afternoon and evening, everybody. As Dr. Boonrat said, it's been a long day for everybody, but we are so pleased and honored to be invited here to share a few words with everybody. And first of all, a big thank you to Chula UTC, as well as the Med Adventures Incubation Lab team for having us here today. This I believe is your first big launch of the program. So a big congratulations and a big thank you to everyone in the team. Secondly, and I think Dr. Boonrat, I think all the presenters and the pitchers are here. So a big congratulations to nearing the end of your journey. I think you have spent maybe almost a year in the incubation lab learning and refining your pitches. So I believe this is still going to be part of the process for you as you continue to learn and absorb and deliver. So thank you so much for your innovation and congratulations on graduating pretty soon on this program. As Onsiri and Dr. Boonrat mentioned, Boston Scientific has done almost 40 to 50 acquisitions, as well as another 40 to 50 financial and equity investments in companies all over the world in the last 10 years or so. We are very, very interested in new technologies, and this is one of the ways we look to expand our businesses globally. We also have a sizable commercial business here in Thailand as well, and we are very glad that our CEO was here a few years ago, as well as being able to interact with Chula as well. And besides these kind of acquisitions and programs, and we also do a lot of clinical programs with key opinion leaders and doctors all over the world and even Asia Pacific, as well as Thailand. We also have other interesting ways where we interact with stakeholders around the world as well. For example, well, we do have a connected patient challenge, where we actually crowdsource externally and using big data to improve patient outcomes. And you can read this off our website as well if you're interested. So, very, very glad that we are continuing our interaction with UTC, and I've met Dr. Ying Yos prior to that as well. And we're glad that we continue to enhance our relationships with Dr. Boonrat and Onsiri and the rest of the team. With that, I will hand over to Jonathan, who will give you a proper presentation on exit strategies and what Boston Scientific is all about. And once again, thank you to everyone and congratulations on moving on with the incubation program. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ben. Please go ahead, Jonathan. And meanwhile, if anybody has any questions, I think best way is to type them down, and we'll get to them towards the end of this presentation. Please, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all of you. Ben, for inviting me, but then also for Professor Boonrat for the moderation, and then for the whole of the Chula team and Ansari for allowing this to happen. But I should say, as Ben said earlier, and was mentioned a little before that, we didn't start this. This was started by a quality university called Chula, which when our CEO, Mike Mahoney, who's a great guy, comes along to Thailand, as was mentioned the first time, and he goes to see some of the top institutions, including Chula, the impression made on him by what he saw just a few years ago made him say, let's carry on and do some work with this group. So it's a great honor to be here in a small way where sort of like some people are doing far more in Thailand. It's an honor to be able to share a little bit and hopefully some good questions afterwards, which will allow us to think a little bit more about an exit strategy. But perhaps I'm going to tone that up and tone that down to talk a little bit more about what it takes to get to an exit strategy, because an exit strategy is actually somewhat easy, because you can actually put your exit strategy when you're presenting to an investor. You can put it in an exit strategy on the slide and say, this is my exit strategy. But from the Boston perspective, I can certainly tell you that the difficulty for a company, a startup, is finding the right time and the right way to strategize on your exit strategy. So that's going to be probably what most of my talk will be about. The questions will determine how the questions sort of end up. But I'm going to share with you a slide or a set of slides. I think this will be the ones. Tell me if you can see my slides. They should be coming up. The title that I've used, because I've used this before, and it basically is a broader title than an exit strategy, because it's a more relevant one, and it's particularly relevant for Thailand, I think. Has the slide come up yet?
Yes, we can see it, John.
Okay. So this wasn't made specially for Thailand, except for the image on the bottom right for Chula. But how to dance with elephants is the way I describe the way that we need to think about working with the concept of the value of a medical device company like Boston Scientific or any of the other large ones, and how to work with them while at the same time you're still at a rather early stage and you don't quite know where things are going to end up. So I'll be talking about an exit strategy towards the end, but there are a lot of stages towards an exit strategy that it's very helpful to think about what your longer term strategy and exit will be, even if you're not even close to an exit strategy. So that's where I'm going to go with my next few minutes. And afterwards, of course, we'll have questions. So without going through too much of the background on this page, I would just say that I'm working in a group now. I was leading the scouting team and still very involved with scouting, which is involved with early stage companies thinking about how to collaborate with Boston Scientific. But the group is now called Global Technology Partnerships, involved with trying to work out the smartest way to work with large groups, whether it is startups, VCs, universities, IBM, whatever group they are, external groups to Boston Scientific, where we can add value on both sides by knowing of each other's projects and seeing how we can work together. So that's what I do. My background is that I've moved to Israel here 25 years ago, and I've been working largely with Israeli startups. I've been in Boston since 2012, and having been a journalist, basically knowing a lot about what's going on inside the Israeli ecosystem for early stage startups, later stage startups as well, in order to enable us to pick how do we decide which ones we want to know more about and how to collaborate with them, which is true for every ecosystem. And it's very important that in places like Thailand, which are growing their system in terms of technology and medical technology, that they always think, okay, how can we make the best noise possible to the right targeted audience so that we will be adding value and at the same time not embarrassing ourselves too early. And it's really a dance, as I call it, a dance with the elephants. It's a dating game, and it's important for both sides that we do this the right way, because that way time is spent well and the right impressions are made. And again, with me, it's quite okay to interrupt during the program if you like. If you write notes in the chat, I won't be able to see it because I'm unable to see chat right now. So a little bit deeper than what was introduced initially about Boston Scientific. We work in 7 primary areas as shown here. And these areas really are very broad inside the body, and they're even broader than they look. And I'll explain why in a moment. But what this does really tell you is that if you have a new technology in the area of orthopedics or in the area of ophthalmology, extremely important areas to the world of medicine, or dentistry, as I just saw a very nice project, that won't be interesting for Boston, because we are not going to start changing our direction when each of these projects are something like billion-dollar projects or much more. And the result, therefore, is that it's unlikely that a really, really good startup would get Boston to be interested in an area outside these main areas. So I'm not going to go through these areas. This information is up on the Boston Scientific website. I can direct you to our investor relations pages, and you can look at these in great detail. But the interesting thing here is, here you see 7 different units. Each of these units may have 5,000 to 10,000 products. Each of those products may have additive elements which are not even in our portfolio yet. So if I simply say a word like home monitoring or areas of data security, there's nothing here which says data security. But we are very interested in data security because we have 2 projects, cardiac rhythm management, which sells over $2 billion a year, neuromodulation sells almost $1 billion a year, both of which are transmitting data at very high rates and need to make sure that the data is secure. That's working with Bluetooth technology, working with battery technology. So there are many, many medical technologies we'd be interested in, which may have an endpoint in these particular areas, but might not be on this slide of core businesses, which, as you know, add up to 2019, about $11 billion, and hopefully even more in 2021. So these are the areas, these are the sizes of the particular units. We've got a small group in electrophysiology, a very large group, for example, in endoscopy and in interventional cardiology, and rhythm management growing nicely and doing pretty well. And here what you're seeing is also where we're growing in operational growth and where we're growing in organic growth. And what happens is that where you see the organic growth number, that means that we're talking here about an area where we did a purchase, which is also helping the growth. So what you're basically seeing is in areas of neuromodulation, interventional cardiology, and also in peripheral, we're doing a lot of purchasing, which may include areas outside where we were a few years ago. And what that means is we're very much in a growth mode in many of these areas, and that's something to bear in mind. And I've just got one more slide on that to share, which basically is, again, this is all public information, a beautiful set of slides that Mike Mahoney, who was in Chula a few years ago, presented in California, actually in January 2020 at the JP Morgan conference. And this is basically telling you something else. It's really important when you talk to a large company that you learn a little bit about its background, or at least the line that's relevant for you, if there's a line relevant for you, because what happens is it'll certainly affect your exit strategy. to see where we are looking within certain areas as key products or new markets will teach you a lot about where we value our growth. And there are areas of growth that we say that we'd like to be growing more. And if you add something, that'll make us grow even more. And there are areas which are already on a very high trajectory, which means that obviously we're always interested in new exciting products. But at the same time, we've got a lot of heavy things inside the portfolio, which are going to make it a very large growth rate. Look at neuromodulation, going up to market growth of 8 to 10% a year. And we are at a far higher figure than that. Peripheral interventions, shooting forward, the market's growing nicely and we're growing even faster. So this is a way of, if you like, learning your partner before you even pick up the phone, simply to understand what are they about, what do they think they're good at, because as you can see, there's no ophthalmology on here, there's no dentistry on here. And if that's the case, you could spend your time better talking to a different elephant and not to us, for example. Okay, so this is really just background information. And another very important part to us is helping the world in different ways of social responsibility. So whether it is making sure that the people in the company are good people and happy people, and that we have a very diverse population, which is very important to us. This is an old slide. You can see 35K. We're past 38 going up. Just last week, we actually did a very large purchase here in Israel of a company called Luminis for $1.1 billion in the area of lasers. So the company is growing and growing. And to us, making sure that our people are happy and that we're helping the world of people and that we try and ensure there's good equity and equality for different genders and different people of diversity, very important for us. Similarly, we care a lot about the planet, and we care also about being considered high in terms of our peers in different fields of metrics. So whether it is being heavily involved with clinical trials, whether it's being a very responsible company or a nice company to work with or company to work in, whether it's a prize for our CEO being one of the best CEOs in the world, or that we invest an immense amount in R&D, all of these things are important to us, not simply the bottom line, are we making a lot of money? So that's important. You should know when you start talking to the company that these elements, when you talk about actually helping the world by having a cheap way of doing things for the third world, that is interesting for Boston Scientific. It needs to be profitable in order to justify itself, but the element of being able to help the world is of great importance. So that's just who we are. I'm now going to shift to talk a little bit more about the way we look at new projects. And if there are any questions till now, you can either put them into the question list or you can ask them right now. I'll stop here for a moment. Is everything clear to date? I'll take that as a yes. So I'll then move on. And I'll talk here about something which is very important for a large company. And this is not a matrix that we created, but it's a matrix we use very often. The way we look at new opportunities that you startups will be bringing to us and that will define the direction of the exit we'll be working towards is where does it fit in our map? So, for example, if I go back a couple of slides here and I speak about interventional cardiology, when we look over here, you'll see here some very new, very smart new technologies in the mitral space, in the TAVR space, in the left atrial appendage space. You may not even know what these are, but the majority of our sales of the 2.8 billion are not in these areas. They are growing. These two areas are growing very nicely indeed. Mitral will come along quite soon. But the majority of our sales in interventional cardiology are actually in areas which are not the growth areas right now, but are very good, very stable and high quality products in interventional cardiology. If I go back to this map, the majority of interventional cardiology that's selling today of the 2.8, I can't give you an exact figure, but a lot of it is in the core. It's when we start looking at areas outside the core that we start getting interested. So if you came along and you said, I've got something to add to your core products, I would say our core products aren't growing at 11%. It's our new products that are growing so fast, perhaps far more than 11%. So I would recommend that you try and look to be working in an adjacency. What is an adjacency? Well, it's this whole envelope over here of areas of where we're either taking existing products and applying them in new areas, or getting into new markets with new products as well. So over here, for example, where we say to ourselves, as we did, for example, with the area of left atrial appendage, that you should certainly look up if you're not familiar with it, what is the Watchman product? But that's an area that we've never worked in before. It's something which our cardiologist does work with. So therefore, to some extent, it's a similar customer over here, slightly different market, and it's a very new product, and it's over here. So when we decided to buy the Watchman product, which we bought a few years back, that was because there was a very good strategy of that company and of Boston to exit so that we could buy into this new adjacency. When you start being too transformational, that's a difficult thing for us to go for. This would be, for example, the ophthalmics I mentioned to you. A very new form of IOL lens would be difficult for us to swallow because we don't actually sell there. So our sales and marketing is zero inside ophthalmics. But if you came along and said, I've got a new product for your cardiology division, or if you're working here in neuromodulation, you guys already are selling to the brain surgeon to put in something very smart and electrical. I've got a product for epilepsy, or I've got a product for brain cancer, which we think might fit in here. Potentially that could be an adjacency. So it's important for you to think, how close is my technology and my product potential for Boston Scientific adjacencies? Because that's our sweet spot. That's where we'd say, in a few years' time, hopefully not too many, we could actually sell your product if we started exiting with you. So that's a very important slide to think about. Which investments would we make for growth? Normally they would be inside the adjacency business. Transformational is where we buy a company. For example, if we were to buy an orthopedic company, we would say it's not a small company that's going to yield us $10 million in 3 years' time, or $50 million in 3 years' time, which is what we'd like to see in an adjacency. Transformational would be, we're going to buy a company that, because it's so large and so profitable, will bring us $500 million of profit in a year or two. So that's not likely to be anybody in this room today. And we should be focusing on, whether it's for Boston or anybody else, who would be interested in me as an adjacency? That's a question you should be thinking about when you're developing your new product. Who, within the range of the top 20 medical device companies, would say, I see you guys as a perfect adjacency for me? Preferably, you'll find 5 to 6 companies like that, and Boston should be one of them, I hope, but it might not be, where you say, my goal is to advance to the right stage, that I should be talking to the companies who could see me as a good target. Not every company in devices would see me as a good target. We wouldn't see a dental company as a good target for us, even if it's a great company. So you need to be thinking, who would see me as a perfect date, as a perfect partner for them moving forward? And then, of course, you have to work out how best to get to them. Any questions on this slide? Okay. Assuming I haven't lost you, I'll move on, but I hope there are a lot of questions coming through on the chat by now. And I'll move on now to the next step of the discussion. Before you think about how you could dance with us elephants, how you could work towards an exit with a large partner, think about how you could build your own team. And I could see with the presentations you presented, much of this is going on already. But this is something that we as a large company look at very often. To what extent have you as a startup really milked your own environment, whether it is, your local authority, whether it is your local angel group, whether it is your government directly, whether it is a collaboration within networks of different larger or same-size startups, like the groups you're working with now, somehow creating something which makes noise as a group that you are part of, and you are doing something good within a group of other validating groups. So by getting angel money, for example, it's not only that you have money in your group, it's that it therefore means that if anybody looks in, you can say to them, one of the major groups in APAC, or one of the major groups in Thailand, or wherever else it might be, or Bangkok, whatever it is, we are working with some of the top angels in this group. We have government support, even if it's not financial support. The government has put us together with a networking group that we do, and companies love to see that you've looked outside your own box and you've got other people validating that you're a good group, because we can't know every company out there. So these are important areas to add what I call artificial experience, meaning by you bringing on new board members, by you being part of an investment by an angel group, there's an easy way for a company to say, I think they're one of the good groups. Here in Israel, for example, if you get money from the government, or if you've got a good VC behind you, or if you bring in as a board member somebody who has been involved with other startups, perhaps in medical, perhaps in property, it doesn't always matter, then people come around and say, oh, these guys know what they're doing if they manage to pull in this guy, or if the government has allowed them to be part of a certain program, or if they're involved with something which is more pan-regional. So if you have a Thai group which has been part of an Australian incubator, or it's been part of a Singaporean project as well, by collaborating with Thailand, whatever it is, it's always good to be engaged with things outside your own environment, and that way create what I call an artificial experience, which means that people would say, wow, the company is only 3 people, but it's got a team helping them of 3 good advisors in reimbursement, regulations, R&D, whatever it is, as well as connected with the university, etc. These are very important things as you're building up your ecosystem, but also your own passport to start talking to a large company. So rather than just reaching out, it's very helpful when you have a professor in your area from your region or from a broader region, where you have a validated board, where you have money coming in from externals, not just from family and friends, which is also good. All these things help you towards your eventual exit strategy of how to work with a large company. I'm going on from there because of time to Boston Scientific. And where do we land up? Well, you land in one of 4 places when you contact Boston. You may go via me, because the scouting team that we created basically knows these groups very well. But the question becomes, where do you want to get to? Now, the term exit means that we buy your company. So the term exit requires an M&A, mergers and acquisitions. And we've done a large number of them in the past 5 years. I think the numbers that were presented before of 39 and 40 is something about 5-year range. We've done many more than that overall. But I would say that M&A is a very important way of us growing, but it's not the only way. We do a lot of internal growth. We also do a lot of investments which lead to M&A. So it's really important you get onto the track of the exit rather than just like that you get an exit. M&As normally are for companies which are more advanced, at least after first in human. That would normally be the stage of the venture investment, which would lead to M&A potentially. But the idea is that sometimes it's useful to engage with Boston earlier, only if it's worthwhile to you. Boston's more than happy to wait. But what happens is that sometimes getting ideas from regional Boston people like Ben and other people in Asia Pac can then lead to collaborating in one form or another, either with a corporate R&D person of some sort or another, or with a divisional R&D, which means the R&D stream within your division. So if you had a product which is working in the cardiovascular area, we would then say, let me put you in touch with somebody in R&D of cardiovascular. Now, that person, we'll talk about non-disclosure, etc. afterwards, but that person would not be writing you a large check and investing in the company, but would have the potential to help you over the next 6 to 12 months to try and get you to be ready, if you could be ready, to be ready for talking to venture. Venture, as I said, would need you at least to be in the clinical phase, at least, But the divisional R&D doesn't require that in order to have a chat with you about collaboration. What would that collaboration involve? Could there be a check involved of collaborative R&D? It's possible. But more important is to know when is the right time to start sharing your perspective with somebody smart who is an expert in heart pumps or stents or left atrial appendage, whatever it might be, or in the area of neuromodulation. You've got an interesting product for epilepsy. When's the right time to start talking to the division? Why do you want to talk to them? To get a better idea about the animal study you want to do. That's a good reason to talk to them. We could probably arrange a call about that. It's not easy. They don't like to talk to all startups. But if you know the right people, they would normally take a half-hour call where you'd sharpen your questions and say, we would love to share with you in 10, 15 minutes what we're doing. And we'd love to ask you the following questions. What's the best animal model? Would we need to do human trials before you're interested? Do you think that the trials we would do in Thailand would be good for you? These sort of things. Could we invite you to see an animal experiment? Things like that, which would slowly lead you towards an exit. This is not an exit, but it's a landing site, as I say. Meaning, to get towards an exit, you do that, and then you end up at the right time after speaking to Boston every 6 months or something, giving us updates as to what's going on. You then let us know that you've already done 200 patients and you're beginning to sell in ASEAN, and you now are interested in advancing further. That's when M&A would say, well, could we help you perhaps invest some money and help take you to Europe or to the US to try and do some more work with you? And then perhaps M&A, because we prefer to do M&A after you've got FDA approval or something like that. So it's a relationship. To get towards an exit strategy, you need to work out when do you want to engage with different parts of Boston and how do you do that? So I imagine some questions are coming up soon and I'm going to be finishing soon, but I want to share a couple more slides with you. Slide number 1 is to tell you that when you start coming along and saying, I have a product that I'm not sure it works, Boston thinks carefully about whether we want to work externally where there's a lot of risk and where we have so many projects coming to us internally and externally about a new idea that hasn't been validated. When you start validating your idea, and then the question is, I need to advance a validated idea. I know that my technology works. I've tested it even on humans, certainly on animals. And I see that the phenomenon works well. It's a really good wound management system using electrostatic potentials. And we want to get into that area. It's a question as to whether Boston would be interested in wound healing, but let's leave that for the moment. Then the question becomes slightly lower risk, might need more investment, but you might be able to also say, if I get Boston interested, perhaps I can get some angels or some VCs interested. So that becomes relevant. And then the question becomes, I want some help with launching and supporting the project. And we're now doing some pilot work that could be relevant at the regional level to say, you know what, we have a product which is already validated, has approval in Thailand. Could Boston help to sell a product like that, at least locally in Thailand or in ASEAN or in Asia Pac or in Europe, whatever it is? And then we say, well, the risk of the product failing is far lower because the product is a good product. It's got good human studies. It's even got approval in some places. Let's see where we could go with that. So these are all different questions that come along and that we talk about. And they basically, we prefer to talk to things, obviously, even if it involves more money later. We prefer to talk when the risk is lower because we've already filtered down the projects to, instead of having 200 projects to look at, we have 3 or 4 projects that are at the right stage, might need a large investment. That doesn't scare us so much as it being a more advanced stage. So I hope the questions are coming up. And with that, one more slide, which basically is an add-on to this slide. This is coming and mapping the sort of things that we do inside Boston when you come along with an idea. If it's a low requirement of investment, then what we would come along and say is it's early stage, so it's low down here. It might be something for corporate R&D or for a divisional R&D or for us to take to an incubator. I'm involved very much with an incubator here in Israel that we are part owners of. And I can send you details about it. It's called MedAccelerator. We take projects from across the world, which have good quality IP, and we advance them with research and development, as well as with animal and sometimes human trials, with a gift, if you like, from the government here of about $800,000 or something, and we put money in as well. Divisional R&D could put more money than that in, but at the right stage advance, and that's a problem. And then there's a venture which only puts in, let's say, from $3 to $20 million, and M&A can be much larger than that. But the question really is, where do you sit on this continuum? Have you checked that Boston would be interested in you based on the area you're in? And then based on the stage you're in, are you still in a research stage? In which case it would be the earlier type of models we would be thinking about. Are you already development, meaning you validated your technology and therefore you might be a little bit more interesting for the division already? Or are you already much more advanced? You've already started your clinicals. You're trying to expand to do more clinicals or to start selling. And that's where it might be relevant if it's directly an adjacency for Boston Scientific for the venture and perhaps after that the M&A world. But I just wanted to give you that as a general picture to let you understand the way that we think and how it is that you might want to consider how to go on from there to thinking about how and when to engage with the elephants, to engage with the very large corporations who know how to work with you, but particularly if you tell them, this is what I'm looking for, I thought it could be interesting for the following reason, and let's discuss it from there. So it's been a rather swift discussion all the way through from the idea of what does it mean to develop an exit strategy, to make sure you're not alone when you come and speak to a large corporation, but rather you've collected on the way, whether it is university experts, whether it is business experts, whether it is angels or VCs, government advisors, you're able to explain why you are an adjacency. And with that, you come along and you speak to Boston and say, how could we be interesting for you? Is it the right time? Would we ever be interesting for you? And how do we work with that? So I hope that's a rather rapid set of questions that you may have, but just a general idea about how to start developing a good exit strategy, to think globally, because Boston normally wouldn't be interested in an exit strategy for a company which is really suitable just for Thailand and the Philippines. But if you start saying it's relevant for a large range of countries and you understand that side of things, Boston will say, hey, we are experts in 120 different countries. And if we feel that we can help you and we can help the world, and Boston could help by selling this, that could be interesting. So I'll stop there. I know that our time is up as well. So I don't know how we stand in terms of any questions, but I would love to hear from you if there's anything you think might be able to, I or Ben might be able to answer for you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for this really nice talk, great presentation. I have a couple of questions from the audience. I'll go with the first one. But before that, love the way you use elephant. You know, in Thailand, it's a great analogy for someone who's easy to deal with, even though so big and so large, right? I think before, to me at least, Boston Scientific is more like dragon in the sky, right? And you guys never have a chance to look at us, but once it's an elephant, it really changes the way we feel. So yeah, Professor Yingyot is here, and he'd like to thank you for a very, very clear message, and definitely we like to work with Boston Scientific in the near future.
Sure.
One question from the audience. It's regarding the view that you looked at the adjacencies. Is there a team that you have that would do the market survey and everything, like when we talk with you guys, or how does this work? Does the team have to do a lot of analysis beforehand to talk with you, or how does it work in a little bit in the detail?
Great question. What I would say is like this. It's very important the team comes along. By the time it comes to Boston, it's very advisable that you have a pretty good idea what your product is and why your product is. So why does the world need X? Or which part of the world needs X is very important. At the same time, what I think would be useful is to say, we think it's very useful for X. I hope you guys would agree. You're talking to the Boston team. But what Boston prefers to understand from a startup that comes along is that it knows where it thinks it should belong. And it may be surprised because there are another 5 companies who are in the space or moving into the space. But that's a very interesting negotiation and discussion to be able to say, wait a minute, you claim ABC. We know of a couple of other companies in the area, this sort of thing. But I do think it's important that they understand why Boston should be interested. So the elephant has got a lot of people to dance with. Why would we want to dance with you? So at least you should know why we want to go dancing. And the answer would be because we're the best. The market is large. You, as a very large corporation, are able to leverage what we, as a very small corporation, were able to start up very efficiently and nimbly and in an agile way. But you can do the marketing and sales far better. But at least you're telling me marketing and sales of what? So you actually know what it is that you're trying to sell. So I think it would be smart to have done your homework first, to have some general figures. We never really believe the startup's figures. We start off with an assumption that you're not lying, but you've read in some report one thing or another, and perhaps when it comes to actually addressable market, it's a nice big number. But when you start breaking it down and you think about who is it a no-brainer who would buy this product, and who might buy this product, and who would have another competitive product more likely to suit them, the numbers go down a little bit, but that's okay. So it's good for you to have initial figures and to allow the Boston experts to say, that's a nice number, but even if the number is a third of what you say, it's still a very attractive market. We should talk more. So you should try and have your homework done. And it doesn't need to be perfect, but it would be a shame if you said, we have this product, are you interested? It needs to be a little bit more embellished than that to talk about why it is that you think this product is amazing for Boston, what it could do for Boston Peripheral Interventions Division in Europe. We think it could add another $50 million a year in 3 years' time. And we believe in the US, it'll take a little longer to get FDA, but once it does that, it'll be $100 million a year sales. And that's because the market is 500 million and we think you'll get 20%. These sort of things are the sort of things that get people to say, wow, it's worth having a second meeting. And the second meeting would then be with protection of an NDA or something like that. We generally, in the global team, we generally don't do NDAs immediately. We prefer to get a general picture of why we should be interested, keep things general. Don't tell us what you don't want us to know. We certainly do not need to see private patents or anything like that. We only need to see public information. And then after that, if we're interested, we will sign an NDA and talk more detail. Okay?
Thank you so much. Another question is actually regarding the patents. So as the company is just about to grow, we as in startup companies have to file for patents. How do you prefer when we enter the country stage, the national phase, for the PCT, for example, in which countries do you prefer to see the patents active in? In which country should they apply for?
So that's a great question. It really depends on the nature of the product, but generally, if you're working with global M&A, if that's going to be the direction you're going in, which we should talk about in a moment, but if you're going for global M&A, it will be surprising if you don't need to have America, that means the USA, Europe, probably China, and Europe, of course, is many more than one country, China and Japan, at least, okay? It depends on the nature of the product. We would expect you to have it protected in your local country as well, most likely, for protection purposes. but we understand there are a lot of costs involved there. But if you came along and you said you feel that it's a product which is really useful for certain regions and not others, and based on that you've gone for certain regions, that will be understood. But do bear in mind that the majority of exits are exits because we find it a global value. So that doesn't mean that you would not be an amazing product for Africa and Southeast Asia and various other parts of whatever it is because of price or because of physiology or whatever it might be. But if you did that, it's harder to get an M&A and an investment from Boston. We tend to invest more at the moment, which may change, in global value companies. I can see it happening. We're going to be investing more in regional companies. And when that becomes the case, you have to be able to justify why are you a company which deserves to have patents covering China, Japan, the rest of ASEAN and Asia Pac, as well as perhaps certain parts of Russia because of disease states that really occur there more than others. But I would recommend to stay with a general track because it's always a red flag when you come along and when you don't have IP in the US or key countries in Europe. Okay. I hope that helped.
Oh, that helps a lot. Thank you, Jonathan. I guess those are the two questions we have from the audience.
Okay. Ben, is there anything, Ben, you'd like to add, particularly to that last question regarding what you said?
Nope, I think you've covered everything. I think just to add a quick little thing to the first question, which is I think there is no standard formula in how companies approach us. I think it all depends on networks and opportunities and a bit of luck sometimes. But I think in whatever way, I think we're so multifunctional. When it reaches the R&D team or the commercial team, we usually will be reaching out to each other to make sure that the communication flow is okay. And we will obviously be able to organize internally ourselves to get the startups to where they want to be.
Sure. And absolutely right. And collaborating with groups like Chula and UTC basically allow us to know already that we're talking about a group with pedigree. You speak back with the commercial teams, they'll work their way back to probably ASEAN, APAC, and then we'll find the right home for them. It's not a problem. But sometimes it's important because people are busy with other things. It's important sometimes to call back and say any news. Quite legitimate to do that. And I know there are a lot of multicultural divides here, but you have to be an entrepreneur and entrepreneurs need to push. So therefore, when you get an answer no, the answer is no. But until you get an answer no, it's important that you realize the answer is not yet no. And therefore, you're welcome to contact whoever it is and say, could you just check? It's been 2 months and I haven't heard. And often that's because Ben or I or whoever may have sent out an email and we haven't got a response. And it's important that you do follow up so that we will follow up, etc. And these things occur and take time, whether it is a summer holiday on one side or a whole load of vacations on another, whatever it might be. So these things do get lost in the wind. And it is very important that you're always very polite. And if the answer is it's not relevant yet, or it's not going to be relevant, then you accept that. Sometimes you get a no quickly. Sometimes it takes longer to get a yes. So often if you are waiting, it's either because the question hasn't been addressed or because it's not a clear-cut no. So think about it that way. Okay?
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you so much for that featured speaker session. I loved the title of Dancing with Elephants and think it's extremely valid to the ecosystem and what's currently happening today. As Chulalongkorn University itself is trying to pivot from being a legacy university into an entrepreneurial university, that's why we're seeing such programs such as MedVentures being supported in the ecosystem. It's an important start for a lot of new innovators in the medical space. ขอขอบพระคุณทางทีมแล้วก็ทางบริษัท Boston Scientific อีกหนึ่งรอบนะคะที่มาเป็น featured speaker ของทาง MedVentures Incubation Program ค่ะ